Well, I want to this day speak about the virtue of charity, which really is a fancy word for love, but we're going to talk about its true meaning, how it is a gift from God that's infused into the soul that empowers us to be who we're really meant to be as human beings. Because the fundamental call of every human being is to love. That's our fundamental vocation. If I go through life without having known what it means to love, without having spent my life loving others, it's really a life wasted. Because God is love, and we are made to participate in His way of loving. God revealed His love in Jesus, who hung on the cross for our sake, and it's His way of loving that He wants to put into our hearts so that we can fulfill our true human vocation. See, I cannot say I love God and hate my neighbor or hate any human being. If we don't love those who we can see, it says in Scripture, in 1 John, then how can I say I love God who I do not see? The test, actually, of whether I truly love God is that I genuinely love my fellow human being. This is the big test. If I shut my heart to any person, no matter what the reason, if I shut my heart to any person, then I've shut my heart to God. This is the truth of how we are as human beings. That's why Jesus commanded us to love God with our whole heart, our whole soul, our whole mind, and our whole strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And remember the man in the gospel who asked Jesus, who is your neighbor? Remember that was the time when Jesus told this parable, which speaks to us of the command to love. Jesus said, a man was once on his way down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of brigands. They took all he had, beat him, and then made off, leaving him half dead. Now a priest happened to be travelling down the same road, but when he saw the man, he passed by the other side. In the same way, a Levite who came to the place saw him and passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan traveller who came upon him was moved with compassion when he saw him. He went up and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. He then lifted him onto his own mount, carried him to the inn, and looked after him. Next day he took out 2 denarii and handed them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and on my way back I'll make good any extra expense you have. So Jesus asked the question, which of these 3 do you think proved himself a neighbor to the man who fell into the brigand's hands? The one who took pity on him, he replied. And Jesus said to him, go and do the same yourself. So that's the classic story, isn't it? That tells us who my neighbor is. It's the one who's right next to me. The one who is struggling in one way or another, maybe. The one who I'm passing by, who needs me on the road. The one who maybe is next door, yeah, but not only the one next door. It's any human person that I come into contact with. That's who my neighbor is. And whether their lives impact on me directly or not, I'm called not to turn away from any person. You see, the priest and the Levite thought it wasn't their business. They just walked around the other side and didn't go to the man in need. But we're told that the Samaritan man, who was moved with compassion, he really had deep wrenching in his guts, as it were, when he saw this man with great plight and came to his aid and assisted him. You see, this is the sort of love that we're talking about, what Jesus calls us to. That we'll have compassion for those who are most in need, those who are on the fringes, on the edges of things. Now, Mother Teresa once spoke to us in the cathedral in Monica, and I heard her say this: "At the end of our earthly journey," she said, "what will matter? At the end of life, we'll not be judged by how many diplomas we've received, how much money we've made, how many great things we've done. We'll be judged rather on, I was hungry and you gave me to eat. I was naked and you clothed me. I was homeless and you took me in. Hungry not only for bread, but hungry for love. Naked not only for clothing, but naked of human dignity and respect. Homeless not only for want of a room of bricks, but homeless because of rejection." And she went on to say, "This is Christ in the distressing disguise of the poor." So she emphasized it's not extraordinary feats or amazing exploits that make one's life worthwhile, but it's whether in all the circumstances of our life we take the opportunity to love, even if it hurts. Love until it hurts. So we're not necessarily called to do great deeds, but to do everything with great love. That's what's important. Now, I want to backtrack a bit because what I've said, that love's not just about who are close to us, but it's about who we meet at any time. On the other hand, our capacity to love grows in family. That's where we first learn to love. It's sort of like a school of love, if you like. It's a context in which our hearts are nurtured in love, trust, hopefully, and we grow to trust others. At first, small children become very dependent on their parents, and we need to receive that unconditional love from parents. So that's what we're reliant upon, of course, that we've been formed in a loving context from the beginning. Unfortunately, most of us have had family lives where that to some degree has been deficient, that we're love poor because of our parents' failure to love. And so that maybe has shrunken our heart, shrunken inside. So we're a bit deficient in being able to love others. We may need to overcome that in some way. Some have had very difficult relationships with their fathers or their mothers, with their siblings, in such a way that there's a bitterness within and a resentment. And so there's a sort of inside and a closedness to being able to really get out of myself and to love others. So firstly, oftentimes there has to be a healing take place in our lives in relation to our family before we can have that capacity to love as Jesus has loved. And he definitely wants to heal us in this regard, right? So it's not good to presume on love for my family, but to take the opportunities to let them know that you love them. And to act in love for your family. I want to tell a story about this. By the way, I'm giving 3 talks on this. So this is the first talk. And I want to end this talk with this story and then continue on with talking about sacrificial loving in the next one. So this is about Tommy. The story is told by Father John Powell a number of years ago. True story. Where Tommy was like the resident atheist in his Theology 1 class in college, right? At the end of the year, Tommy was handing in his exam paper, and he said to the priest, sort of somewhat flippantly, "Do you think I'll ever find God, Father?" And the priest decided to use a bit of shock therapy. So he said, "No, Tommy, I don't think you'll ever find God," to be very dramatic, and then with a pause. Tommy looking a bit shocked. He said, "But Tommy, I can be assured that God will find you." So a few years later, the priest heard on the grapevine that Tommy had actually contracted terminal cancer. So he wanted to go and find Tommy, but before he could, Tommy found him. He arrived at the office, and he said, "Oh, Tommy, I hear that you've been sick." He said, "Yes, I'm very sick. I've had cancer now in both lungs, and it's only a matter of weeks." And the priest showed sympathy, of course, and Tommy said, look, it could have been worse. I'm 24 years old now, but I could have gone on like this and reached 50 with no values and no ideals, just thinking about booze and seducing women and how much money I can make. But what I really came to see and talk to you about was that, in the last day of class, you said something to me that really stuck with me. And the priest was taken aback because he remembered what he'd said. He was being smart. But then Tommy told him, he said, look, when doctors removed a lump from my groin and told me that, I only had a certain time to live and it was already spread into my vital organs, I began to try to locate God. So I started banging on heaven's door, but it was like a bronze door that wouldn't open. And so I gave up. But then I thought about what you said during class. You said that the essential sadness would be to go through life without ever having loved. And you said also that it would be very sad to go through life and not to tell those whom you really love that you love them. And so I began, he said, to work on my family. I went to the hardest one, my dad, and he was reading the newspaper. And I said, Dad, I've got something to tell you. Dad grunts, and the newspaper doesn't move. He said, Dad, I've got something to tell you. Newspaper comes down. You could see his father's face over the newspaper. Seriously, Dad, I've got something to tell you. What is it, son? Dad, I want you to know that I love you. That I've always loved you. And I need you to know that. Newspaper falls to the ground. And Dad starts to weep. And he hugs his son. And Tommy said it was so beautiful to be with my father that night. We spent the whole night together, talking, and him holding me and him weeping. He said it was so beautiful. I had begun to experience love like I hadn't experienced it before. And then I went to my mum and my sister. That was easy, because they broke down straight away. He said, and then one day, I just turned around and there was Jesus. I encountered God, revealed in Jesus. I'd been banging on heaven's door, but now he found me. You see, I'd been like some sort of animal trainer, just trying to sort of get God to jump through my hoops. But he wasn't up to that. But then, when I least expected, he came to meet me. And you said, Father, you were right. I didn't find him, he found me. And the priest said, oh, Tommy, you're saying something extremely important here for everyone to hear. When we open up to love, we'll find God. As it says in 1 John 4:16, God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. So the priest wanted Tommy to come and share this with the class, but unfortunately, he never did share it with the class. It was too late. But he did beg the priest, as he was dying, go and tell them all. Will you tell them for me? Because I can't. Tell the whole world for me that what matters is that we love. Thank you. I've learned to love. So my dear friends, I leave that with you. It is the greatest calling of all of us to love. It starts with our family, but it must not stay there. We learn to love in our family, and then from there, we can take love to the world. Bless you.